My name is Angela Code. I am Saisi Denin First Nation. I am originally from Tuduli Lake, Manitoba. I live in Whitehorse, Yukon, and I am the director and producer of Indigenous Journeys through Academia.
My educational journey, God's honest truth, my dad died when I was 15. I wasn't even gonna go to high school. I never really thought I was ever gonna be successful or make money or go to college or anything like that. I just thought I'd always be a bush Indian no matter what.
It's like first you say, why am I here? Why am I doing this? I want to quit. And you realize you want to quit because you feel like you don't have a place there to begin with.
Indigenous people have lived in what is now known as Canada since time immemorial. Their languages, cultures, spirituality, and connection to homeland are all inextricably linked. The ecological knowledge and skill that they have developed over millennia has ensured their survival. Upon European arrival, high Indigenous mortality rates due to disease, war, and murder made colonization possible. Historical influxes of European settlers into Yukon Territory include the fur trade, the Klondike Gold Rush, and the construction of the Alaska Highway. From the 1850s, the Indian Act unjustly forced generations of Indigenous children away from their homes to attend Indian residential schools. These haunting institutions were federally funded, taught by Christian priests and nuns, and were put in place with the goal of assimilating Indigenous people into white Canadian society. The last of these schools closed in 1996. Throughout history, Indigenous peoples have and continue to fight against colonial oppression and injustice. They have always affirmed their inherent rights entitled to their home territories and for Indigenous sovereignty. For years, Indigenous people pushed the government to recognize and reconcile the atrocities of Indian residential schools. From 2008 to 2014, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, also known as the TRC, convened a series of events and heard over 6,000 courageous testimonies to learn the truth about what happened in Indian residential schools. In 2015, the TRC released its final report. They found that the loss of cultural identity, abuse, and lack of preparation to succeed within the Canadian economy caused trauma and social dysfunction. One of their main calls to action was to address the current high number of Indigenous student dropouts. The TRC also requested to eliminate the discrepancy in funding of schools on and off Indian reserves, where children continue to leave their families behind to pursue high school or further education. In response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's calls to action, MasterCard Foundation and Rideau Hall decided to partner with the Yukon College and Vancouver Island University to try and increase the numbers of Indigenous students in post-secondary. During the 2017 and 2018 school year, the Yukon College found that 47% of Indigenous students dropped out, whereas only 18% of non-Indigenous students dropped out. The Yukon College hired our voices to investigate the reasons as to why Yukon Indigenous students were not staying in school. So I've been traveling around the Yukon Territory interviewing Indigenous students and alumni to talk to them about their personal experience with post-secondary and what types of challenges and supports that they faced and how we can improve academia for Indigenous people.
What a lot of Indigenous people face in terms of barriers to post-secondary education is the lack of quality high school education in communities outside of the major urban centers. So I know in the Northwest Territories, some of the communities don't actually offer all of the prerequisite courses you need to get into certain university programs. So post-secondary is not a barrier in and of itself, it's the lack of opportunities at the public education level that doesn't set people up in the same way as you would get set up in a southern institution where you have a lot of teachers and a lot of fancy school infrastructure and programs and things like that. You're not as much exposed to opportunities that you can access through post-secondary in the North. Like if you grew up someplace like Victoria or Vancouver or Edmonton, where they have a pretty robust kind of university community or research community, you grow up exposed to all these opportunities and possibilities.
It's pretty much a must. Once you complete high school in a small community, you do have to take a year and maybe possibly 2 years to upgrade to get into a post-secondary program.
A lot of times with us too, First Nation kids, they're just pushing us through. You know, a lot of times we don't even deserve to pass.
After leaving grade 8 here in Pelly, I was put in the Wells program with Whitehorse, which was half-day school and half-day work. But when I left Pelly, I couldn't read or write, so by the time I finished grade 12, I didn't finish with a diploma, I finished with a certificate of completion. When I moved back to the community, I still struggled with reading documents, still struggled with doing the paperwork and under the director. So I'd always avoided or always used the computer to spell check certain things or look up words. Worked 2 years and realized that I need to catch up, so I went back to college and did developmental studies 2 and 3 and finished up to prep 060.
In the Yukon Territory, there are many communities that don't have high school. And so many Indigenous students have to come to Whitehorse in order to finish high school.
Yeah, it was pretty tough the first year going to Whitehorse. It's an environment, we're not really used to living in the city because I grew up in Ross River and I was away from family for a while. But I never really thought about dropping out because I like support, back home more support. So I was really grounded in high school. I think it varies between individuals.
When I got to high school, I mean, they put me in all the lower classes right off the bat just because I was from Old Crow. You know, it was the message that was being sent to me by my environment that I would never be anything, you know.
I dropped out of high school. I could have used a little bit more support, somebody behind me to give me that push that I needed to really know how important it was for me to just get through school and get her done. Maybe if there was some sort of like recognition program where, students get recognized when they reach certain milestones and, somebody saying that we see what you're doing, your hard work and dedication is going to pay off one day. I didn't really see any of that in high school, and I think it'd be a good idea.
I think in the Northwest Territories, because the economy is so dominated by certain industries like mining or oil and gas, that a lot of students are really pushed into the trades, and employment in those industries are presented as the most viable option for a lot of people. I know when I was in high school, I told one of my guidance counselors I wanted to go to university to take political science, and they said that I should do a trade and work for the mine because my marks weren't good enough to get into university. So I think that's a really common experience for a lot of Indigenous people in the North. They're kind of pushed into trades, and there's nothing wrong with being a tradesperson. It's a great kind of career path, but the arts, literature, social sciences, humanities, and things like that, where the content is really about teaching people to think critically and write critically and challenge systems and be creative. I think that those types of post-secondary educational opportunities are not presented to people in a similar way, so people aren't exposed to those kind of options, which I think just kind of limits the scope of opportunity that people think they can access.
For the first 2 years, it felt more like I wasn't doing anything I really wanted to do. It was really hard, and also throughout that period, I was just learning Western art, and the only time that Northwest Coast masks were ever in the picture was only upon the subject of primitivism. It was never in the context of the coastal people in the coastal world and the Indigenous world. It was hard to swallow, always learning someone else's history, and you can't help but feel like someone else's world and someone else's art world is prioritized over yours. I feel like it's just started to get better. I feel very blessed to have teachers this semester that take the time to hear my ideas, and not just in an artistic point, but also in an academic position. There should have been more resources to educate students on what to expect. Like even just a day of talking about, this is what it's gonna be like. These are the things that you might feel. This is what it's like to have a budget. If you feel this, this is normal. Because at the time I just felt like I failed. You know, like I just felt like I suck and I don't know how to manage anything and I'm barely making it by.
When you're a student as well too, you don't really have much income. You kind of have to budget what you have, which is mainly funding that you get 10 months out of the year. A lot of times I felt like I should have been kind of just getting any kind of job just to provide, but there was a lot of difficult times, and a lot of times I was so close to, I don't know, walking away, but I stuck it out, and thankful to be in the position I am right now. So
in the north, currently there is no university. Yukon College is working towards that, but in order to pursue that higher level of education, many northern Indigenous peoples have to move south. For many Indigenous students, they come from small communities and they're constantly surrounded by their family and their community, and they know everyone. So when they go to academic institutions in the south, it can be very isolating. In university and college environments, it's very common to have a very prevalent binge drinking culture, which poses all kinds of its own complexities for Indigenous students, because many of them come from communities that are dry communities, meaning that it's illegal to drink there. And so they carry with them certain taboos in the drinking culture, and also, just the need to have friends and to socialize. So there's a lot of pressure to binge drink, which can be more problematic for Indigenous students than the non-Indigenous students.
that's one of the issues that possibly makes them walk away from schooling, is having that alcohol issue, and possibly drugs too. When you're kind of coming here from a small community, you don't know anybody too, so it's kind of hard to fight the temptation.
There wasn't really the capacity to really get to know, or activities to get to know Indigenous students. There wasn't really like a space for us to socialize or get together. A lot of us didn't even know that other Indigenous students were there.
I was the only First Nation in my class in Douglas College in New Westminster. Every class I was only First Nation there. Went to school alone, did homework alone, ate alone. Could be the most lonely experience of my life, I could say.
Moving from Whitehorse to Edmonton and not having anybody except for my older brother was tough, especially when I had like my great-grandparents and my grandparents and all of like my cousins and my aunts and uncles. While I was gone, my grandma, she'd been battling cancer for about 25 years and it was getting worse. So I made the decision after I was done my year that I was like gonna come home, because I didn't want to be away if anything were to happen. And I'm very comfortable and confident with that decision I made back then, because I can never get those years back with her. And I can always go back to school.
Indigenous people in general face much more trauma, tragedy, ill health, and death within their home communities. And sometimes they don't get the support and understanding that they need from their professors, their peers, their counselors, etc. And so many leave in order to get that support from their family and their community.
My roommate at the time, he was one of my best friends. He passed away suddenly, 24 years old. It was pretty tough, I took it pretty hard, so decided to take a semester off. It just happened to be an election year for my First Nation government. People were really pushing me to run for leadership. Spent the next 4 years on chief and council, So that's kind of the reason I never did finish the degree.
One of the things that was also quite common among all the interview participants is the need for more cultural inclusion of Indigenous art into some of their extracurricular activities. And that connection to their culture and way of expressing themselves helps them de-stress. It acts as therapy for them.
It would be great to have like some really creative ways, I guess, to de-stress or even to kind of help take that load off of their shoulders.
And do you find, like, when you're stressed out, beadwork is a stress reliever?
Yeah, it was a really big help in dealing with my grief, where it's hard for me to talk to like people and stuff like that. I find it's a lot easier to channel all my thoughts and everything into what I'm doing. And then it kind of becomes easier to talk to people after when I'm talking about it.
For yourself, you have agency. And although there might be things broken in your family, and there might be things broken in your community, and there might be things that are really difficult, that you have a choice to get out of that situation, and you are allowed and empowered to take care of yourself. The work that you do for yourself will plant seeds to do healing work for your family. So find resources or supports that sit well for you. Like, I'm a huge advocate of counseling. It's so relieving when you get to talk to an Indigenous, properly trained counselor or someone who is from a community who actually understands where you don't even have to name those things. They just get it. It's really lovely to see that there's some institutions now and like universities or schools that are really privileging Indigenous spaces and making it easier for students to get together. And I think that's really important.
I do think it's important to note that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, it's good that they want to improve the education for Indigenous students in the Western sense. But it's also really important that we have other forms of education for Indigenous students that include more Indigenous ways of knowing and being.
Use Indigenous people more, bring more Indigenous people in as a part of the administration and faculty, adopt more Indigenous perspectives and Indigenous knowledge, and try to incorporate in the Indigenous way of seeing the world in your classes. Our societies were completely different than what we learn in schools. They keep propagating these ideas and messages that make us feel less than, but the truth is we were incredibly self-sufficient, incredibly intelligent, and there was no better way to live in the environment we lived in than what we developed specifically for that environment as Indigenous people. You know, these are the kinds of things we need to start learning. The data is there. Indigenous communities that have more culture, more language, have less suicide and less crime.
Right now, we're at a place where high school diplomas and like university accreditation is important for a lot of people for good reasons, because it helps people in their life journeys. But at the same time, there's an urgent need for people to go back to the land and to learn from the elders and learn the cultures and learn the ways of the land. And so I think it's critical that we find a way to kind of think outside the box and value some of these land-based teachings in a way that's at least on par with how we value kind of traditional Western types of knowledge. We need to find a way to credit the people learning on the land from their elders.
My great-grandfather, he had a grade 4 education, but he's the smartest man I've ever known. His grade 4 education surpasses any PhD or master's degree, in my opinion. Everything that he has taught me and could have ever taught me, I can't learn from a book. Like, you're going to learn how to start a fire in the middle of a snowstorm, right? You're going to learn that from a book? I don't think so. You got to be out there on the land experiencing it. I weigh heavy value on that.
We live in a time right now where we're losing all our knowledge holders, and not going to be not too long before most of them pass away. It's our responsibility as a young Dene person or young First Nation person to carry those teachings on that's been passed on to us. Right now, my grandpa's in his 90s, and I've been really trying to, learn from him as much as I can. I was just beaver hunting with him like 2 weeks ago, and he really taught me how to, skin the beaver up properly, how to carefully prepare it. That stuff's priceless. It makes me feel good when just to see him smile and skin out that beaver. That's what makes me, want to learn more. I want to be able to teach it, to my kids, to the younger, kids that are growing up right now. Yeah, it'd be really important, I think, to carry those teachings on is what makes us who we are, Dene people. Can't really take that away. If it dies, part of us dies with it. That's why it's so important.
It's really great to see that more institutions are trying to include indigeneity. Students who attend their programs get to do land-based education where they can tan moose hides, or they can go hunting or fishing and get university credits for that. It's not just for Indigenous people, it's for everyone.
What we need is not just buy-in from the communities, it has to be bigger than that. We need buy-in from other organizations, other governments, territorial, provincial, federal. Everybody in the country needs to buy into this concept, not just Indigenous people. There's many, many ways to educate yourself. Work as many jobs as you can. Take every opportunity that comes your way. Get out of your comfort zone, try new things.
The pathways to education are they're ever-changing for everyone. And if you need to take time off, then maybe that's the right choice for you at that time. But don't ever let it discourage you from continuing that path, because you can get it done whenever you want.
You always got to keep in the back of your mind, life is always going to get better. It's not always going to stay a hardship or a struggle where you're down in the mud on your knees, and you don't think life could get any better. It will get better. You just have to be patient.
Nothing comes easy, and you have to sacrifice some stuff in your life in order to get where you want to go. And just the message I could say is just don't quit and keep moving forward.
You just realize there's a lot more opportunities if you keep going, and when you finish, it's like the best feeling ever.
I would say first and foremost that your experiences and your story and where you come from is valid. Allow your challenges and your pain to be your empowerment. Because I never thought about being an educator, but going through this system has opened my eyes to why we need more Indigenous teachers. And through the pain, it's helped me find my place and my purpose. So just let it empower you, and let it be your strength. And just be grounded in you. Don't lose yourself in academia. Conquer academia and make it better.